Twisted Pair is talking wire ferrules, and if you don't know a wire ferrule from a wheel ferrule, don't worry, we got you covered. Welcome back to Twisted Pair. I'm your host, Matt Ayers. Stranded wire or cable is used in automotive electrical applications because it's very flexible, making it easy to route anywhere in the vehicle. It's resistant to vibration, and it's an excellent conductor of DC current. However, it does have a downside, and that downside is that each individual strand of wire is very, very weak, and it's easy to fray, crush, or break those strands of wire if you're not careful during termination or handling. And that becomes a real problem. We're talking about a lug type or screw down termination, and that's where the wire ferrule comes in. So Damon's waiting in the shop. He's got cool new tools to show you. He's got a lot of good information. Let's go join him and see what he's got.
So yeah, we're going to be covering all things ferrules. I'm going to be covering primarily how to use the ferrule tools and which type of tools to grab. And we may see Matt's model hands come in here at one point just to show us all the new scars he's got, because scars are cool. But when I'm done, Matt's gonna take over and really show you some of the application of how these can be used in the upfit industry. Now, this is kind of an untapped resource for the upfitters because this is something that's not really ever been used in this industry, although it is used extensively in parallel industries like just electricity in itself. You're going to find this kind of stuff commonly used on your high voltage power transmission lines, things like that. And the whole point of this is to give you a more solid connection. And that's what we're going for today. We're going to talk about a solid connection. So let's get going into it. Let's start with some tools, and then I'll pass you off to Matt. Okay, so we're at the workbench now, and here we've got several different crimp ferrules on display. Now, what exactly is a crimp ferrule? Well, a crimp ferrule is intended to go into like a terminal block, one of the ones that you would see on some of the sirens. You'll have a screw down type block, and a lot of times in the audio industry you'll use these kind of connectors when you're making your speaker connections and things like that. Now what it does is you take a crimp ferrule like this and you end up putting it over the wire and crimping it down, and it keeps all the wire nice and tight and bound inside of the crimp ferrule itself. So when you go to tighten it down in a terminal block, what it does is it keeps those wires from straying out to the sides of the screw as the screw comes down and tightens down onto it. So the advantage of that is power transmission, wire protection, and keeping things tidy. Now we've got 5 different sizes here. These are by no means all of the different sizes. There are literally hundreds of different sizes depending on the length of the ferrule, which this is the length of the ferrule. If you want the insulation portion of it, which is this right here, and then also the diameter of the ferrule. Now for each type of ferrule, you're going to have a different type of crimpers. Some crimpers are automatic, other ones use dies, and the dies are set to certain sizes. So, if we were using this particular one, we would need one with a die that will do 25 millimeters squared. Now why 25 millimeters squared and not actually 4 gauge? Well, that's because crimp ferrules are measured in a metric fashion. So here on the screen, I've put a chart up that uses a lot of the common sizes that we're going to use in the upfitter industry. Now on top of that, crimp ferrules a lot of times will have what's considered for single wire. So this one, if you look at it, it's nice and round. And if you have one that's made for 2 wires going into it, you get this one here that's kind of rectangular with rounded corners. Okay, so let's clear the workbench and get ready to show some tools. So the first tool I'm going to show you is the automatic type crimper. Now these types of crimpers are made to work automatically. They have a set of dies in there, and as you crimp down, the dies just keep getting smaller and smaller. And once they get to a certain level of tension, you'll start ratcheting on these. These are fantastic, and they're fast, and they're great for doing this. Now these range in price from some of them being down at like $10 and other ones being up closer to $200, depending on what you're looking for. Obviously the higher end ones are probably going to be a little bit more consistent. Another feature of the higher end ones is this little knob here. This is a 16 millimeter squared or 10 millimeter squared knob, and you can take it and rotate it, And by rotating it, what it does is it controls how much or how wide the dies are here. So if I were to change this to 16 millimeters squared, it gives me just a little bit more room to crimp with. So it just speeds that process up. If you're doing a lot of these over and over and over, and you're doing smaller ones, you probably want to have this on that 10 millimeter square setting. So let's sample a actual crimp ferrule inside of these crimpers. Here I've got 14 gauge wire, and I've got a small crimp ferrule connector. This one here is going to crimp at 2.5 millimeters squared. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and put it on. Let it go all the way through. If you notice, I got a little bit extra sticking through. That's okay. For this demonstration, I would just cut it off at the end. But here's how it works. Just put it on, put it in, give it a crimp, and there you go. It's a nice square crimp, and once we cut the stray wires off at the end, this is going to have excellent power transfer and connectivity to whatever you're tying it to. Now these type of crimpers, you can get them in square crimp, and you can also get them in hexagonal crimp. Now let me show you a different kind. This type of crimp is a plier type crimp, so it works just like a set of pliers, just open and close them like that. And really all you're doing is you're getting your crimp ferrule with the wire in it, putting it in the proper diameter position and squeezing it closed. And you can see this one's not a rectangular or a square or a hex. This one's actually a rounded slash, we'll call it rounded and collapsed type crimp. And if you had something like this, you'd probably take this, have the nice rounded side be facing up towards your screw connection. Moving on to the next type of crimper, we've got the standard smaller diameter. So this one's made for crimping from 1/4 millimeter squared up to 2.5 millimeters squared. And if we look at a close-up of this one, you can see that this one's not doing a round or a rectangular. This one's actually trapezoid type shape. Now the last type of crimper is probably the most versatile because it's using a set of ratcheting crimp frames. So in this case, I've got a very large type crimper on a standard ratcheting crimp frame. Okay, now this one goes from 6 millimeters squared all the way up to 25 millimeters squared. And 25 millimeters squared would be that large 4 gauge one, but for the most of what we're using, we're probably going to use the 10, the 16, and probably the smaller ones like the 2.5 and the 1.5 for your 14 and 16 gauge wires. And you can get these, you can get different dies for these. So this is a large set of dies. Here I've got a smaller set of dies here. The smaller dies go from 2.5 millimeters squared all the way up to 6 millimeters squared. And obviously they're interchangeable, you can swap them out. Now the beauty of these ones is you can buy different throat depths on these. So this particular throat depth, it's rated for 22 millimeters. So here's an 18 millimeter depth ferrule. You could see that I would crimp this and it would do it all in one pass. So that really covers what crimp tools you need to crimp the ferrules. Matt's going to cover some of the applications of where you could use these ferrules in the upfitter industry. And what they're going to do is they're going to, one, clean up your install, but two, they're going to give you a better positive connection wherever you use them. All right, Matt, take it from here.
Yeah, Damon. In addition to all those great crimp tools that you showed, I really like this set of Rennsteig crimpers because they load from the front, which can be really beneficial in some tight confines. And just to give you an example, here's a 8 gauge battery cable. I'm going to go ahead and put the proper size ferrule on it and check her out. Nice clean crimp, which is going to be really awesome for an application like this siren here, which has a large lug connector for its power feed. And we'll put that in there. Now we can torque this thing down without fear of breaking or fraying the wires and having them maybe fall off and short circuit some other component in the siren. Torque it down to spec and check this out. You're not going to be able to pull that out. That's as secure a connection as you're really ever going to get. But there are some other uses for the ferrules that I think upfitters need to be aware of, such as screw blocks like this. You're probably used to these from some of the older siren products. And here, I didn't modify this. This is after it's been cut out of an installation. I like to hang on to these, but you can see here there's some broken wires. Here, the wires are damaged and crushed. But you could use the wire ferrules and get something like this, and this is not going to pull out, and it's going to be very resistant to vibration and side-to-side load. And it looks really, really good. Maybe you're a DIN rail guy. Okay, well, DIN rails are great, but look what happens when I compare the two ends of the wire. The DIN rail side where I went right down on the wire is just crushed and distorted, and you wouldn't want to try and reuse this if you had to move it to another terminal, because that wire is very, very traumatized, versus this can be used indefinitely. And the same thing with these type of screw blocks, where these little screws come down and they don't engage the wire very well, and this is actually only engaging about 1/4 to 1/2 of the wire inside here, versus here we go with the ferrule. So I can pull that out. I can't pull that out. I actually bent the terminal block trying to do it. So there you go, some really good applications. Ferrules are not a one-trick pony. I think there's something that every upfitter can benefit from. Back to you, Damon.
One of the key concepts for Twisted Pair is constantly learning. Matt and I, we're constantly learning, whether we're going to other websites, whether we're reading it from a book, learning it from our audience. We want to learn more and more and more so we can relay what we've learned to those in the field that are actually doing the upfits. And this is a best practice. If you watched Matt when he started pulling on those wires and trying to pop them loose out of the terminal blocks, he pulled really hard on the one that did not have a ferrule and it popped loose. Yet when he pulled that as hard or harder on the one with the ferrule, it didn't come loose. So that's really indicating the part that ferrules could play in an upfit. Consistency, durability, longevity, and I mean, obviously the appearance of it, it just looks better. So I think that's all we have for today. Till next time.